Listen carefully, because this is not just information, this is revelation. There are people sitting in silence carrying a weight they never chose, a role they never applied for, a label that was handed to them before they even understood what it meant. And that label is this, the scapegoat. In a narcissistic family system, nothing operates on truth, everything operates on control. And in order for control to survive, someone must be blamed. Someone must carry the shame, the failure, the tension, the dysfunction that the system refuses to confront. That someone becomes the scapegoat. You. Now understand this clearly. Being the scapegoat does not mean you are weak. It does not mean you are the problem. In fact, it often means the exact opposite. It means you are the one who sees. You are the one who questions. You are the one whose presence disrupts the illusion. And illusions are dangerous to those who depend on them. A narcissistic environment is built on image, not integrity. It's built on appearance, not authenticity. And when you begin to express your truth, when you begin to ask, why does this feel wrong? You become a threat to that carefully constructed illusion. So what do? They project, they shift blame, they rewrite narratives. And slowly over time, they assign you a role. The difficult one, the ungrateful one, the problem. But here's the reality they don't want you to understand. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. And people who refuse to face themselves will always try to break the mirror. Being the scapegoat means you were conditioned to carry emotional burdens that were never yours. You were trained to apologize for things you didn't do. You were taught to question your own reality while others denied it. That confusion you felt, that self-doubt, that constant need to prove your worth, that was not your identity. That was programming. And the most dangerous thing about this programming is that it convinces you to abandon yourself in order to belong. But hear me clearly, you were not created to shrink so others can feel comfortable. You were not designed to carry dysfunction just to keep peace. Peace that demands your silence is not peace, it is control. Now here is where transformation begins. The moment you start recognizing the pattern, you begin reclaiming your power. The moment you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me? Your healing begins. Because the scapegoat is often the truth teller, the one who refuses to participate in denial, the one who feels deeply, sees clearly, and eventually rises differently. And yes, it is painful, because when you wake up, you also realize something heavy. You may never receive the validation, apology, or understanding you deserved from those people. But let me tell you something powerful. Closure is not something they give you. It's something you claim. You don't need their agreement to know your truth. You don't need their permission to heal. You don't need their validation to walk away from dysfunction. Your responsibility is not to fix the system that broke you. Your responsibility is to rebuild yourself in truth. And that requires courage. It requires setting boundaries when you were taught to tolerate everything. It requires choosing distance when you were conditioned to stay. It requires self-respect when you were trained for self-sacrifice. But every step you take toward your own identity, every moment you choose clarity over confusion, every time you honor your voice instead of silencing it, you break the cycle. Understand this, your role as the scapegoat was never your destiny. It was a position assigned to you in a dysfunctional system. But your purpose is far greater than any role someone tried to force on you. You are not here to carry their projections. You are here to discover your truth. You are here to rebuild your identity. You are here to live free from labels that were never yours. And the day you truly accept that is the day you stop surviving and start becoming. There is a silent assignment that happens in many families, and no one ever announces it, no one ever explains it, yet one person ends up carrying what everyone else refuses to face. That assignment is not based on truth, it is based on avoidance. It is based on the deep need of a dysfunctional system to survive without ever taking responsibility for its own brokenness. And so, without consent, without awareness, one individual is chosen to hold the weight of emotions, tensions, and failures that do not belong to them. That individual becomes the scapegoat. To understand this, you must first understand the nature of a narcissistic environment. It does not function on honesty. It functions on preservation of image. Everything must look right, even if nothing feels right. Everything must appear stable, even if everything underneath is fragile. And because truth threatens that image, truth becomes the enemy. Now, here is the problem. Pain does not disappear just because it is ignored. Dysfunction does not dissolve just because it is denied. It must go somewhere. It must be placed on someone. And that is where the scapegoat is born. The scapegoat becomes the container for what the family cannot process. The anger that is never addressed, the insecurity that is never admitted, the failure that is never owned, the shame that is never healed, all of it is redirected. Not because it belongs there, but because it is convenient. Because it protects everyone else from facing themselves. And slowly over time, this redirection becomes a pattern, and that pattern becomes a belief, and that belief becomes a role. You begin to notice something. When something goes wrong, somehow it traces back to you. When tension rises, somehow you are the cause. When emotions become uncomfortable, somehow you are the trigger. It does not matter what actually happened. It does not matter who was responsible. The outcome is already decided before the situation is even understood. You are the explanation they use to make sense of their chaos. And here is what makes it even more complex. This is not always loud. Sometimes it is subtle. It is in the looks, the tone, the comparisons. It is in the way your efforts are minimized while your mistakes are magnified. It is in the way your voice is questioned while others are believed without hesitation. It is in the way you are held to a standard that no one else is required to meet. You grow up trying to understand it. You try to fix it. You try to be better, do better, say less, say more, adjust, adapt, perform, achieve, anything that might finally change the narrative. But no matter how much you change, the role remains the same. Because the role was never based on your behavior. It was based on the system's need. That is the deception. You think you are being corrected, but you are actually being conditioned. You think you are the problem, but you are actually the outlet. You think if you just get it right, everything will be okay. But the truth is, everything depends on you being wrong. Because if you are not wrong, then someone else has to take responsibility. If you are not the problem, then the system has to face itself. And that is what it is designed to avoid at all costs. So the blame continues. The criticism continues. The emotional weight continues to be placed on your shoulders. And over time, something begins to happen internally. You start carrying things that were never yours. You start feeling responsible for things you never caused. You start apologizing for things you did not do. And the most dangerous part is not what they say about you. It is what you start to believe about yourself. You begin to question your worth. You begin to doubt your perception. You begin to wonder if maybe they are right. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you are too difficult. Maybe you are the reason things feel this way. But step back for a moment and look at the pattern. Look at how consistently the blame is directed. Look at how rarely accountability exists anywhere else. Look at how your reality is dismissed while theirs is protected. This is not correction. This is displacement. The scapegoat is not chosen because they are the weakest. They are chosen because they are accessible, because they feel deeply, because they respond, because they try, because they care enough to engage. And that makes them the easiest place to send unresolved pain. But understand this clearly. Being the container for someone else's pain does not mean it belongs to you. You were never designed to carry the emotional responsibilities of an entire system. You were never meant to absorb what others refuse to process. You were never created to be the explanation for dysfunction that existed long before you had a voice. And yet, you learned to carry it. You learned to hold it. You learned to survive under it. You became strong, but not in the way people celebrate. You became strong in silence, strong in endurance, strong in understanding things no one ever explained to you, strong in reading the room, adjusting your energy, anticipating reactions, protecting yourself without even realizing it. But strength developed in survival is not the same as strength developed in freedom. Because survival strength is heavy. It is exhausting. It is built on constant awareness, constant caution, constant self-monitoring. It keeps you functioning, but it does not let you rest. And that is the hidden cost of being the scapegoat. You don't just carry the family's pain, you carry the responsibility of maintaining stability in an environment that refuses to be stable. You become the emotional regulator, the one who absorbs tension so others don't have to, the one who is blamed so others can feel innocent, the one who is misunderstood so others others can feel understood. And all of this happens while your own needs go unmet. Your own emotions go unacknowledged. Your own experiences go unvalidated. So where do you put your pain? That is the question the scapegoat is never allowed to ask, because the system is not designed to hold your truth. It is designed to silence it. But there comes a moment, and this moment is critical, where something inside you begins to resist the narrative. You begin to feel that something is not adding up. You begin to notice that the weight you are carrying does not match your actions. You begin to realize that no matter how much you try, the outcome does not change. And that realization is not weakness. That realization is awakening. It is the beginning of understanding that what you have been carrying was never yours. That the pain you absorbed was placed, not earned. That the blame you received was assigned, not deserved. And once you begin to see that, everything starts to shift. You start questioning the roles. You start separating your identity from the accusations. You start recognizing patterns instead of internalizing them. And slowly you begin to release what you were never meant to hold. But understand this, letting go is not easy. Because when you have carried something for so long, it feels like a part of you. Even if it hurts, even if it drains you, even if it confines you, it is familiar. And stepping out of that role means stepping into the unknown. It means redefining yourself without the labels you were given. It means facing the possibility that the people you wanted understanding from may never give it. But it also means something greater. It means freedom. Freedom from blame that does not belong to you. Freedom from responsibility that was never yours. Freedom from a role that limited your identity to something you were never meant to be. You are not the carrier of their pain. You are not the source of their dysfunction. You are not the problem they made you out to be. You were the solution they refused to understand. And the moment you stop carrying what was never yours is the moment you begin to discover who you actually are. There is something deeply misunderstood about the one who becomes the scapegoat, and it is this. People assume it is because of weakness, because of failure, because of some flaw that made them an easy target. But the truth is far more uncomfortable, far more revealing, and far more powerful than that assumption. The scapegoat is often the one who sees what others refuse to see. In an environment where denial is the foundation, awareness becomes dangerous. When a system survives by avoiding truth, the moment someone begins to recognize patterns, to feel inconsistencies, to question behaviors that do not align with what is being said, that person disrupts everything. Not by force, not by rebellion, but simply by perceiving reality more clearly than others are willing to. You may not have had the language for it in the beginning. You may not have been able to explain it or prove it, but you felt it. You sensed when something was off. You noticed the difference between what was said in public and what happened in private. You picked up on emotional undercurrents that others ignored. You saw contradictions that didn't make sense, and even when you stayed quiet, your awareness was present, and that awareness made you a threat. Because in a narcissistic environment, consistency is not required. Control is. Truth is not prioritized. Image is. And when someone begins to notice the gap between the image and the reality, that gap becomes uncomfortable. It creates tension. It exposes what others are trying to keep hidden. And instead of addressing the truth, the system will often target the one who reveals it. Not necessarily because you spoke loudly, but because your very presence carried clarity. You might have been the one who asked simple questions that somehow turned into conflict. You might have pointed out something that seemed obvious to you but was treated as disrespectful or inappropriate. You might have expressed emotions honestly, only to be told that you were overreacting or creating problems. But pause for a moment and think about that pattern. Why is it that truth creates tension in that environment? Why is it that honesty is interpreted as rebellion? Why is it that clarity is labeled as disruption? It is because truth threatens control. When people build their identity around a false narrative, they become dependent on that narrative. It becomes their protection. It becomes the way they avoid confronting their own insecurities, their their own wounds, their own failures. And anyone who challenges that narrative, even unintentionally, becomes a problem that needs to be managed. So instead of adjusting the narrative, they adjust the perception of the person. They begin to label you difficult, sensitive, disrespectful, problematic, negative. And over time, those labels are repeated so consistently that they begin to stick, not just in the minds of others, but in your own mind as well. But understand what is really happening here. Those labels are not descriptions of your character. They are defenses against your awareness. Because if you are difficult, then they don't have to listen to what you are saying. If you are too sensitive, then they don't have to acknowledge the harm being done. If you are the problem, then they don't have to examine the system. It is not about who you are. It is about what you represent. You represent the possibility that things are not as they claim to be. You represent the discomfort of truth. Also, you represent the mirror that reflects what they do not want to see. And people who are not ready to face themselves will always try to distort the mirror before they ever consider changing their reflection. So you are not rejected because you lack value. You are rejected because your awareness exposes what others are trying to hide. And this is where the confusion begins to take root. Because on one hand, you feel what you feel. You see what you see. There is a clarity inside you that recognizes the inconsistency. But on the other hand, you are surrounded by voices that deny it, dismiss it, or reinterpret it in a way that makes you question your own perception. And when that happens repeatedly, it creates internal conflict. You start asking yourself, am I wrong? Marcus, you start wondering, maybe I'm misunderstanding. You start doubting your instincts, your emotions, your reality. And that doubt is exactly what maintains the system. Because the moment you fully trust what you see, the illusion begins to lose its power. So the system works to keep you uncertain. It keeps you in a state of questioning, of second guessing, of trying to reconcile what you feel with what you are being told. But clarity does not disappear just because it is challenged. It may become quieter. It may become buried under layers of doubt, but it remains. That feeling you had, that sense that something wasn't right, that awareness that things didn't add up, that was real, and it still is. The challenge is not whether the truth exists. The challenge is whether you will trust yourself enough to acknowledge it. Because once you do, everything changes. You begin to see patterns instead of isolated incidents. You begin to recognize behaviors instead of excuses. You begin to understand that what you experienced was not random. It was systematic. And more importantly, you begin to separate yourself from the role that was assigned to you. You realize that you were not too much. Minti dima tesapa. You were responding to something that required a response. You realized that you were not too sensitive. You were aware of things that others ignored. You realized that you were not the problem. You were interacting with a problem that existed independently of you. And this realization is both liberating and difficult because it validates your experience, but it also challenges everything you were taught to believe about yourself. It requires you to unlearn the labels. It requires you to rebuild your identity based on truth rather than projection. It requires you to trust your perception even when it was previously dismissed. And that takes courage. It takes courage to stand in your awareness when others deny it. It takes courage to honor your truth when it was once questioned. It takes courage to stop shrinking yourself in order to maintain a system that never truly supported you. But here is the power in this. Your awareness is not a flaw. It is a gift. It is the reason you can break patterns that others repeat. It is the reason you can create clarity where there was confusion. It is the reason you can build a life based on authenticity rather than illusion. Because once you see clearly, you cannot go back to not seeing. And that clarity gives you a choice to continue participating in a system that requires you to deny yourself, or a choice to step into your truth, even if it means stepping away from what is familiar. And that choice is not easy, because awareness often comes with isolation. It comes with the realization that not everyone will understand your perspective. It comes with the acceptance that some people are not ready or willing willing to see what you see, but your responsibility is not to make them see. Your responsibility is to remain true to what you already know. Because the moment you start betraying your awareness in order to maintain connection, you lose yourself. And no connection is worth that cost. So honor what you see, honor what you feel, honor the clarity that has always been within you, even when it was challenged. Because the scapegoat is not the one who failed to fit in. The scapegoat is often the one who refused consciously or unconsciously to participate in what was not real. And that refusal is not weakness. That refusal is integrity. It is the quiet strength of choosing truth over comfort, awareness over denial, authenticity over approval. And when you begin to embrace that, when you begin to see your awareness not as something that isolated you, but as something that protected you, everything begins to shift. You stop asking, why was I treated this way? And you start understanding, what did I represent in that environment? And the answer will not diminish you. It will reveal you. You were not chosen because you were less. You were chosen because you saw more. And now that you understand that, the question is no longer about why it happened. The question is what you will do with the awareness you have. Because awareness is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of transformation. There is a slow and almost invisible process that takes place when a person is repeatedly blamed, questioned, and emotionally misrepresented over time. It does not happen in one moment. It does not arrive with a clear warning. It develops quietly, layer by layer, until one day you are no longer just responding to what others say about you. You begin to believe it. This is how identity becomes distorted. It begins with inconsistency. You experience something clearly, an interaction, a tone, a behavior, and your internal response is natural. You feel hurt, confused, uncomfortable. That is your reality. But when you express it, or even when you simply react to it, you are met with denial. You are told that it didn't happen the way you perceived it. You are told that you are exaggerating, misunderstanding, or overreacting. And at first, you resist that. At first, you trust your own experience. You think, no, I know what I felt. I know what I saw. But when that response is repeated again and again, something begins to shift. Because the human mind is designed to seek stability. It wants consistency between what is felt internally and what is confirmed externally. And when those two things do not align, tension is created. So you try to resolve that tension. You begin to question yourself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm making something out of nothing. And that is the entry point of distortion. Because instead of questioning the environment, you begin questioning yourself. Now understand this clearly. This is not a sign of weakness. This is a natural psychological response to repeated invalidation. When your reality is consistently dismissed, your mind attempts to adapt in order to maintain connection, in order to reduce conflict, in order to survive within that environment. But that adaptation comes at a cost. You start disconnecting from your own perception. You begin filtering your thoughts before you express them. You hesitate before trusting your instincts. You silence parts of yourself that once felt certain. And slowly the voice inside you, the one that knew, the one that felt, the one that recognized truth, begins to grow quieter. Not because it disappeared, but because it was no longer safe to listen to it. This is where gaslighting becomes powerful. Not because it convinces you immediately, but because it creates doubt over time. It erodes certainty. It replaces clarity with confusion. And confusion is the perfect environment for control. Because when you are unsure of yourself, you become more dependent on external validation. You start looking to others to tell you what is real, what is right, what is acceptable. And in a narcissistic system, that external guidance is not designed to support you. It is designed to maintain the system. So the narrative is reinforced. You are told who you are. You are told what your intentions are. You are told what your emotions mean. And even when those interpretations do not match your internal experience, you begin to consider them because your own sense of reality has been weakened. This is how identity shifts from being internally defined to externally controlled. You no longer ask, what do I feel? You start asking, what am I allowed to feel? You no longer trust, what do I know? You start wondering, what will they accept as true? And in that shift, you begin to lose connection with yourself. You may still function. You may still perform. You may still meet expectations. But internally, there is a disconnect. a sense that something is off, even if you cannot fully explain it. You might feel like you are walking on uncertain ground, constantly adjusting, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to avoid being wrong. Because in that environment, being wrong does not just mean making a mistake. It means reinforcing the role that has been assigned to you. So you become careful. Careful with your words, careful with your reactions, careful with your presence. But no matter how careful you are, the outcome does not change. Because again, the role was never based on your behavior. It was based on the system's need for someone to carry the blame. And this is where the distortion deepens. Because when effort does not lead to change, the mind begins to internalize failure. You think, if nothing I do works, then something must be wrong with me. And that belief becomes the foundation of a distorted identity. You begin to see yourself through the lens of accusation rather than truth. You start identifying with labels that were never accurate. You start shrinking your sense of self to fit a narrative that was never yours. And the most painful part is this. You begin to treat yourself the way you were treated. You criticize yourself before others can. You doubt yourself before trusting yourself. You dismiss your own emotions before expressing them, because it feels safer to align with the narrative than to resist it. But what you are aligning with is not truth. It is conditioning. You were trained to see yourself a certain way, trained to question your instincts, trained to prioritize others' perceptions over your own reality. And training can be unlearned. But before it is unlearned, it must be recognized. You must begin to see the pattern not as a reflection of who you are, but as a result of what you were exposed to. The confusion you feel is not because you lack clarity. It is because clarity was repeatedly challenged. The self-doubt you experience is not because you are incapable. It is because your confidence was systematically undermined. The identity you carry is not entirely yours. It is partially constructed from external projections that were never accurate to begin with. And once you begin to see that, something powerful happens. You create distance between who you are and what you were told you are. You begin to observe your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. You start asking different questions instead of what's wrong with me. You ask, where did I learn to think this way? Instead of why can't I get it right? You ask, why was I made to feel wrong in the first place? And those questions open the door to clarity because they shift the focus from self-blame to self-understanding. And understanding is the first step toward rebuilding identity. Now, rebuilding is not immediate. It is a process because you are not just creating something new. You are untangling something that was deeply ingrained. You are separating truth from distortion. You are learning to recognize your own voice again. You are practicing trust with yourself, sometimes in very small ways. Trusting your perception in a conversation. Trusting your emotions without immediately dismissing them. Trusting your decisions without needing constant reassurance. And each time you do that, you strengthen the connection with your authentic self. But there will be moments of discomfort. Moments where the old patterns try to return. Moments where doubt resurfaces. That does not mean you are failing. It means you are transitioning, because unlearning conditioning requires repetition, patience, and awareness. It requires you to choose yourself in ways you were never taught to validate your own experience even when others don't, to honor your own emotions even when they were once dismissed, to define your own identity without waiting for external approval. And that is not easy, especially when you were trained to do the opposite. But it is necessary because the identity you were given was not built on truth. It was built on projection, avoidance, and control. And you cannot live fully while carrying an identity that was never yours. So you begin to release it, not all at once, but gradually. You let go of the labels that limited you. You let go of the beliefs that diminished you. You let go of the narrative that defined you as the problem. And in that release, you create space. Space for clarity. Space for authenticity. Space for truth. And within that space, you begin to rediscover yourself. Not the version shaped by blame, but the version rooted in reality. The one who feels deeply, not incorrectly. The one who perceives clearly, not excessively. The one who responds authentically, not problematically. problematically. And as that identity strengthens, something shifts internally. You no longer seek constant validation. You no longer depend on others to confirm your reality. You no longer carry the same level of confusion because you have reconnected with the one source that was always there, yourself. And that connection changes everything. Because once you trust yourself, the system that once controlled you loses its influence. The words that once defined you no longer hold the same power. The roles that once confined you no longer fit. And you begin to live from a place of truth instead of distortion. Not perfectly, not instantly, but progressively. And that progress is powerful because it means you are no longer living as who they said you were. You are becoming who you actually are. There comes a moment in the life of someone who has carried a role that never belonged to them when the question changes. For a long time, the question was, how do I fix this? How do I make them understand? How do I finally become enough in a system that keeps telling me I am not? But eventually, through pain, through exhaustion, through repeated cycles that never lead to resolution, a deeper question begins to emerge. And that question is not about them anymore. It is about you. What do I need to do to reclaim myself? That question marks the beginning of a shift. Not a small shift, not a temporary adjustment, but a fundamental turning point. Because as long as your focus remains on changing the system, you remain tied to it. You remain dependent on its response, its validation, its acknowledgement. And in a narcissistic environment, that validation is inconsistent at best and withheld at worst. So waiting for it keeps you in a cycle that never completes. Breaking free begins when you realize something that may feel uncomfortable at first. You may never receive the understanding you were hoping for. You may never hear the words that would have made everything make sense. And you may never get the apology that would have acknowledged the weight you carried. And that realization can feel like loss because it challenges the hope you held on to. It forces you to face the possibility that closure will not come from them. But here is where strength begins to take a different form. Because closure was never meant to be given to you. It was meant to be claimed by you. And claiming it starts with truth. Not the version of truth that was shaped by others. Not the narrative that was repeated to you. But the truth of your own experience. The truth of what you felt, what you saw, what you endured. The truth that may have been dismissed, minimized, or denied, but never actually disappeared. You begin by acknowledging it. You stop explaining it away. You stop minimizing it. You stop comparing it to others to decide if it was bad enough. And you allow it to be real because it was real. And in doing that, you begin to separate yourself from the conditioning that taught you to question your own reality. But reclaiming your truth is only the first step, because truth without boundaries still leaves you exposed to the same patterns. And boundaries, this is where many people struggle, because you were not taught to set them. You were taught to tolerate. You were taught to adjust. You were taught to endure. So the idea of saying no, of limiting access, of creating distance, it feels unfamiliar. It may even feel wrong at first. You might feel guilt. You might feel fear. You might feel like you are doing something selfish. But understand this clearly, boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. They are the way you communicate to yourself and to others what you will and will not carry anymore. They are the line between what is yours and what is not. And for someone who has spent so much time carrying what was never theirs, that line is essential. Setting boundaries does not mean you stop caring. It means you start including yourself in that care. It means you recognize that your energy, your time, your emotional capacity, these are not unlimited resources to be used without consideration. And when you begin to set boundaries, something interesting happens. The system that benefited from your lack of boundaries will resist. It may question you. It may challenge you. It may attempt to pull you back into old patterns. Not because you are wrong, but because your change disrupts what was familiar. And this is where clarity becomes important. Because if you're not clear about why you are setting boundaries, their resistance can make you doubt yourself again. But when you are grounded in your truth, their reactions do not define your decisions. You understand that their discomfort is not evidence of your mistake. It is evidence of your shift. And you continue. Sometimes that means creating emotional distance. Sometimes that means limiting conversations. Sometimes that means stepping away entirely. And that last one, that possibility of distance, distance or separation can feel like one of the most difficult steps, because even in dysfunction, there is still connection. There are still memories, still moments, still parts of you that hope things could be different. Walking away or even stepping back can feel like letting go of that hope. But what you are actually letting go of is not the possibility of healthy connection. You are letting go of the expectation that it will come from a place that has consistently shown it cannot provide it. And that is not giving up. That is choosing reality over illusion. That is choosing your well-being over a pattern that continues to harm you. And as you create that distance, something begins to open up inside you. For the first time, you have space. Space to think without constant influence. Space to feel without immediate dismissal. Space to exist without being defined by a role. And in that space, you begin the process of rebuilding. Now, rebuilding is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to who you were before the distortion. It is about rediscovering your preferences, your values, your voice. You start asking simple questions. What do I actually like? What do I actually believe? What feels right to me? Questions that may seem basic, but for someone who has been shaped by external narratives, they are powerful because they shift the focus inward. And as you explore those answers, you begin to form an identity that is based on authenticity rather than adaptation. You start making choices that align with you, not just choices that avoid conflict. You start expressing yourself without constantly filtering for acceptance. You start living in a way that reflects your truth, even if it is different from what was expected of you. And with each of those steps, your sense of self strengthens. But understand this, healing is not linear. There will be moments where old feelings resurface, moments where you question yourself again, moments where the past feels closer than you would like. That does not mean you are moving backward. It means you are processing layers that were once buried. And each time you move through those moments with awareness instead of self-blame, you reinforce your growth. You remind yourself that you are no longer in the same place, that you have tools now, understanding now, clarity now, and gradually those moments become less overwhelming because your foundation becomes stronger. A foundation built on truth, on boundaries, on self-awareness, not on roles, not on projections, not on expectations that never truly served you. And from that foundation, something else begins to emerge. Self-respect. Not the kind that depends on approval, not the kind that changes based on how others respond, but a steady internal sense of worth. The recognition that your experiences matter, that your feelings are valid, that your identity is not something others get to define. And when self-respect becomes part of your foundation, your decisions change. You no longer accept what diminishes you. You no longer stay where you are consistently misunderstood. You no longer sacrifice your well-being to maintain a connection that requires your silence. Because you understand your value in a way that does not need to be proven. And that understanding is freedom. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of choice. The ability to choose what aligns with you. The ability to walk away from what does not. The ability to live without constantly carrying what was never yours. And that is what breaking free truly means. It is not about changing the past. It is not about getting others to see what they refuse to see. It is about reclaiming your present. Reclaiming your identity, reclaiming your right to exist as you are, without distortion, without unnecessary burden, without roles that limit your truth. You were never meant to spend your life proving that you are not what they said you were. You were meant to discover who you are beyond all of that. And the moment you commit to that discovery, to that rebuilding, to that truth, you step out of survival and into something far greater. You step into ownership of your life.